Assalamu alaikum and very good morning. First, I want to thank the organizers to invite me here and present my thoughts on this very important topic. I'll actually talk about some basic issues related to ethics. And I'll start with, in some ways, defining ethics from an Islamic perspective in a little bit different way. We all know that when we talk about business ethics, it includes things like honesty, integrity, providing the right information. Then, of course, there's another slant to ethics related to corporate social responsibility. Now, all of these, of course, applies to Islamic finance. But I think when you talk about Islamic banking finance, there's some additional things which are or should be considered. Now, one of the things which was touched on by Neil was, of course, when you talk about ethics and law, there's some confusion or discussion in terms of how do you define ethics. A lot of people, even some scholars would say that as long as a contract is legal, it is ethical. So we don't have to go beyond that. But I think that is wrong, especially if you look at the some of the classical literature on Hukm Taklifi, which basically classifies all acts in 5 groups. And these 5 groups are obligatory, the wajib, the recommended, the mandub, the permissible, the mubah, the reprehensible, the makruh, and forbidden, the haram. So when talking about Islamic finance, we're talking about the prohibitions. This is only one aspect of the classifications, which are 5. The other classifications include the makruh, which is reprehensible, and also recommended, which is mandub. And I think the ethics lie in these. And if you talk about Islamic finance as industrial prohibitions, then you're basically missing this, the other aspects of this classification of acts. So if you bring in this classification, we may have an act which is legal, but it can be unethical. Now, how do we define what is ethical and not? So basically, we have to go back to the Muqasid al-Sharia. And one way to, and actually this is a very broad way to look at Muqasid, is that Sharia came to enhance welfare, the maslaha, and prevent harm, mafsada. And if we look at Muqasid in these terms, enhancing welfare and preventing harm, you cannot do this by just looking at prohibitions. So if you look at the legal aspect, it will not give you enhancing welfare and preventing harm. You have to go beyond the legal concepts of Sharia. And I think that's where we have to talk about these other issues. And these issues basically relate to what is reprehensible and what is recommended, preferred, and some of the things which were discussed, for example, support for microfinance. I mean, there is nothing legal about it. It is actually a question of preference, whether it is something recommended. Of course, from the maslaha perspective, from a maqasid perspective, this is definitely something which would be Islamic. Now, if you don't take this broad maqasid approach, of course, this will not be factored in the discussions. And similarly, there are other issues in terms of the harms which certain transactions do in societies. And the implication at the contract level is, when we look at a contract, we not only look at the contract itself, the pre-contract issues like intention, and also the impact, the post-contract impacts of a contract. And that's where the implications of harm and welfare come in. So I think that one of the key problems actually in Islamic finance is we are focused on the contract, but we don't look at the pre-contract issues related to intentions and also the post-contract issues related to the impact and implications of the contract. And if we look at that, then some of the things actually which has been mentioned, that because before the crisis, actually because the focus was on the contract, Islamic finance was moving very close to Islamic finance. And as had been mentioned, that had this crisis occurred maybe 5-10 years after it had, after 5 or 10 years, Islamic finance probably would have faced the same problems, because it was actually not looking at the consequences of some of the products which were being brought into the industry, in the market. For example, if you look at one of the key issues is debt, and I think Islamic financial sector is using quote-unquote legal contracts to expand debt in Muslim societies. So if you look at what happened in Dubai, Dubai also had a bubble which busted, and this bubble was actually fueled by the financial sector, which included the Islamic financial sector. If you look at some of the products which was mentioned by Brother Iqbal, these derivative instruments, I think Islamic finance actually created products which could replicate these similar products. The impact would be the same had this crisis had occurred 5 years from now. So the issue is that we know that there is an issue of bringing in ethics into the decision making of developing Islamic products. The question is how. And I think partly it has been touched by Neil's presentation. At the organization level, it has to actually come from the board of directors and of course the Sharia supervisory boards. The regulators have a role to play. If you look at enhancing welfare and preventing harm, the Maqasid objectives, I don't think the organizations are too much interested in these. So the regulators definitely have a role to play to, in some ways, form Sharia boards which have individuals other than Sharia scholars who can look into these ethical issues. I think I was given 10 minutes, so finish. Thank you very much.